We continue here on the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Johnny Gadamowitz and Ethan Frank with you today. We're joined by Mike Berardino of the South Bend Tribune and ndinsider.com. Mike, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for thinking of me, and this will be fun.
He's breaking down all things Syracuse and Notre Dame for us, and a real expert on the Irish. Be sure to give him a follow on Twitter as well at Mike Berardino. Mike, let's start out with this. Obviously, the big story for the Irish this year, full year number one under Marcus Freeman. Obviously, in a season where you have losses to Marshall and Stanford, it's hard for that not to be the narrative, I guess, when people will reflect back. But what's sort of been some of the overarching bigger takeaways from Freeman's first full year at the helm?
Well, it's interesting. The messaging is something that you're constantly paying attention to. Is there consistency in the messaging? And no, there really hasn't. At times it's been, well, for instance, after the Ohio State game, it was because they led well into the second half. The idea was they needed to finish better. Well, then the next week, after hearing finish, Marcus decided that no, that was putting too much emphasis on the late game situations. They needed to execute. So we heard about that after the Marshall loss. And the players, of course, were hearing that. And then at some point that also flipped into, well, maybe we're not putting enough emphasis on the start, because Notre Dame, until this UNLV game, which kind of throws a lot of the stats out of whack because UNLV is not very good. But before that game, Notre Dame had scored 6 total points in the first quarter all year. So what was the new word? It was they needed to have urgency from the beginning. Well, they're still sticking with urgency, but it can be a little bit exhausting after a while, just trying to keep track of the appropriate buzzword. And that's a first-year coach kind of thing, I would say. I think, he's kind of feeling his way through. He admitted as much after some time with Jim Tressel here recently. His coach at Ohio State, his mentor, and a guy who was excellent, obviously, at messaging during his long coaching career, that you do need to find something that works and then stick with it. So right now it's urgency.
So you talk about the buzzwords, but what about, the people that support this Notre Dame team? Are people, when Marcus Freeman was hired, it was, and Brian Kelly left, it was, Marcus Freeman has to be the choice here to replace Brian Kelly. Are people still as enthusiastic about Marcus Freeman as they were, when he first got the job back in December?
Well, certainly it was going to be hard to keep that level of buzz going because, although he's certainly at times he must feel like he's playing a character. Right, it's you see him in the Hangover spoof that they did, and they spent a lot of money on sending Foskey and Mayer and Freeman out there to meet the Golics in Vegas, and they got a lot of run out of that. 3.5 million clicks. But what really matters is, in the end, where are you at the end of your season? Are you playing for national championships? Are you upholding the standard that Brian Kelly had at a clip of double-digit wins every year for the last 5? So no, I mean, there has been some slippage in terms of the perception, in terms of the efficiency, and that's growing pains. Marcus Freeman even using that term recently, that there are going to be some growing pains when you try to put your own stamp and make a program yours. The problem is it's very rare to step into a situation as ready-made for national championship contention and still try to put your own stamp. So he didn't want to be viewed, it seemed quite clear, he has not wanted to be viewed as someone who was just a caretaker or just, check whatever they did last year and continue that. There's been a lot of reinvention on the fly, and some of it has not gone well. I mean, something as simple as adding or bringing back pregame mass at the Basilica on the day of a game was a quote unquote distraction, one of those distractions that Brian Kelly had done away with in the reboot of the program along the way, because he was there 12 years. There was a learning curve there. Nearly got blown out of the water in 2016 when they went 4-8. But he in changing that course, one of the things was streamline, simplify. And so that sort of ceremonial, spiritual, but ceremonial as well, experience was moved to Friday night. Marcus brought it back to game day. And what do they do right out of the chute? They lose to Marshall at home the first day that they try that. Well, they're sticking with that schedule, but there's a little more pomp and circumstance on even the so-called victory. They had to even rebrand the walk. It had been the player walk Obviously this is going to be a road game at Syracuse, but a home game experience at Notre Dame, it wasn't even enough to continue just the nomenclature of what that was. Everybody has a walk. It was a player walk. They had to change it under Marcus Freeman to victory walk. And then you lose 2 of your first 3 opportunities after a victory walk. So maybe it has to be rebranded again. I don't know. Player walk was working just fine.
Well, it's no secret that one of the bigger issues for the Irish, especially as of recently, has been under center. Obviously, Tyler Buckner goes down, Drew Pyne comes in, and I think it's safe to say Irish fans not necessarily all too pleased with what Pyne has given them on the field. Safe to say that this has been one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem for this team so far, the quarterback play?
It's that along with the play calling, I guess. That former quarterback Tommy Rees is the offensive coordinator here, and when he had Ian Book and he had Jack Cohn, things went a lot more smoothly then in this first year of trying to these 2 guys had never started a game, had thrown a combined like 64 passes in their careers, Buckner and Pyne. And so you have Buckner for the first 2 games, the injury, out for the year with a shoulder, and then Pyne, this is a 3-star guy from Connecticut, kind of an afterthought, a good, emergency kind of piece, total program guy, Notre Dame man, they'll tell you. I mean, very popular in the locker room, but somewhat limited with what he can do. I actually think that Drew Pyne's been better overall than I expected with the physical part of things. There are times at North Carolina, which, I think you guys could throw for 300 and a couple touchdowns against North Carolina. But in BYU out in Vegas, where this was a representative Division I FBS level quarterback, a top 20 kind of quarterback. But then there have been other times where he was very unstable, uncertain, and tip passes have been a problem. He's not that big of a guy. If you stood him next to Garrett Trader, there may be that opportunity on Saturday. Well, it's gonna look like Father Sunday, but it's not that way. This is a guy who has to beat you with his mind and his heart, and he's going to have to avoid the big mistake. And there've been some red zone turnovers for Drew Pyne, and some, of course, the famous one, I guess you guys probably noticed, where Tommy Rees lit him up, and it got caught on video during a game where the hashtag became DYFJ, and we'll just leave it there.
As a fellow Connecticut resident, and I grew up about 15 or 20 minutes from where Drew Pyne went to high school. So our high schools are a little bit of rivals. And, when I heard Drew Pyne was going to be Notre Dame's quarterback, I was like, really? Drew Pyne? This is a guy, I watched when he was in high school. It was like, I could see, maybe getting to the college level, but Notre Dame starting quarterback, I think, is that the overall feeling watching him, that, it's more of a surprise that this is the quarterback for, one of the most prestigious programs in college football's history.
I'd be curious to hear from you, Ethan, if you had any, if you had a particular anecdote from the Drew Pyne days, or, was there one thing that the overall, I hear you. Was there something, did he throw a famous interception against you guys?
No. He always beat us up, but
New Canaan, right?
Yes, New Canaan. I went to Staples in Westport, which is a couple towns away. Yeah. So he usually beat us up, but it was never like, okay, this guy's going to be a Notre Dame quarterback. It was always like, maybe, a lower, Division I team or something like that, not Notre Dame.
Well, the interesting thing about Drew Pyne is he's, for whatever reason, he's become friendly through his passing camp, quarterback country guys down in Nashville. And then like Stetson Bennett is one of his best friends in the world, apparently. And he has really put that out there. Stetson Bennett's, a peer and a mentor at the same time. And Drew is really plugging into that, has even before he was brought in as the starter after the injury. Because if you look at the arc of Stetson Bennett, the fourth in his career, this is a guy who was a walk-on at Georgia, had to go off to a junior college, didn't light up the world in Mississippi at a junior college, comes back to Georgia, and then next thing you know, you look up and he's just elbowing his way past, all those guys, JT Daniels most recently, and he's the starter, and then he wins a national championship. He just does what he has. He stays out of the way largely, but he made some big time throws, and they might repeat. I mean, if Drew Pyne's, fantasy scenario would be to become the Stetson Bennett at Notre Dame. Now, he's only a sophomore in eligibility right now, so whether that's something Notre Dame fans want to think of or not, they really don't. But I mean, if he really stabilizes and goes that Stetson Bennett path and becomes productive enough to be more than just a caretaker of that offense, then he could be around here for a while. They also have Steve Angeli, who's on deck. He's a true freshman from Bergen Catholic, and they put him in the game the other day. This is a guy who's not a massively recruited guy, but a guy who seems to be mature beyond his years, and it wouldn't shock. It does seem like it's about time to get him a series here or there. I don't know if it happens Saturday, but they do have Boston College and Navy coming up, and I think you'll see an off season and going into next spring where it'll be Buckner healthy again, Pyne, and then probably a transfer option that comes in here, and they let him battle it out. But in terms of Saturday, Drew Pyne in a dome, who's really good indoors at Allegiant Stadium out in Vegas, but that was against BYU.
In terms of the game on the ground, the running game for the Irish, obviously sort of, a three-headed monster, I guess you could say, if you want to call it that, with Diggs, Tyree, and Estime, although Estime, the fumble issues as of recently. Yeah. In a perfect world for Marcus Freeman, who sort of steps up amongst that room as the guy, or are they content to kind of ride this pretty even split system that the Irish have created here?
I think they like the split that they have. Logan Diggs did have 28 carries the other day, 130 yards, and this is a guy who had off-season surgery on his shoulder. He's healthy from that, and that was as good as we've seen him. But I think they like it. Chris Tyree's change of pace, and of course you'll see them. The pattern has been mix it up with the safe passes in the first half, and then second half, if once the lead is established, then they just start pounding the rock, and that's where I think Audric Estime still could emerge from that doghouse. I mean, I don't think it'd be a good career move on his behalf to fumble for a fourth time in a short span, but this is a solid guy, and he's still their leading rusher and really hard to bring down, missed tackles, forcer kind of guy, and right now just in this weird little funk. But Chris Tyree, track speed. He's the kickoff returner as well, and they'll split him out into the slot and even wide, and I think you're going to see that balance continue. They're not looking for one guy, even though that was a 28 carry game as it turned out for Diggs. I think they like the balance.
You talk about the run game, but you can't talk about Notre Dame's offense without talking about Michael Mayer, who is one of the best players in all of college football, a likely first-round pick in next April's NFL draft. He is just, I think the best word that people use to describe him is that he is a freak in terms of athleticism and talent. What makes him so good as an offensive weapon?
Well, the physical part of it, no doubt, run fast, if you can run fast, he can knock you to the ground. He can, he's got also the mental piece. I mean, the preparation piece, and he's sneaky. He's a sneaky freak and a beast is Marcus Freeman's go-to word. But this is a guy who, it's hard to live up to expectations, certainly hard to exceed them. And it's certainly even harder to do at tight end university, where he's breaking records, and he's got Ken McAfee now lined up from the 70s. He's one touchdown away from passing him for the career numbers, and these are all accrued. He already has the most receptions in Notre Dame history among tight ends, and these are all done in 3 years. I mean, this guy just started in the COVID year of 2020, so you're right. He's going to be a top 10 overall pick most likely. And he's also, for our purposes, become more outgoing and showing more of his personality in the interviews, because he's just filled with confidence, and it's going very well for him, except for the fact that there are those 2 nagging losses. Now, he is good enough that opponents do seem to know that on third down, regardless of distance, Drew Pyne's going to be looking for Michael Mayer, and it doesn't even matter if you have 2 guys chasing them all over the field. He's going to find a way. He's going to out jump you. He's going to outsmart you. He's going to do something to assert his will. And Stanford was able to make him kind of quiet for a bit. Ohio State made him quiet for a bit, but in general, you're right. Snap to snap, you've got to be aware.
Outside of Mayer, though, it seems like the rest of this kind of receiver room, and we'll call it that, even though Mayer at tight end, has disappointed. I mean, outside of maybe the emergence of Jaden Thomas, guys like Lorenzo Styles, Braden Lenzy, fair to say letdown performances from majority of the receiver room outside of Mayer?
Well, I preface that by saying the expectation wasn't very high for that room. I mean, Tobias Merriweather's the name to keep an eye on. He's the one who's really out of that whole group, a freshman with 1 catch this year. He just hasn't been given many snaps, but his breakout game is coming. It has to be. He was out there for more snaps than normal, maybe 23 total snaps, offensive snaps this last game, and Pyne overshot him in the end zone. But I think Merriweather's the guy who can do the things that a modern receiver has to do to be that downfield threat. But you're right. Lorenzo Styles drops have been a problem for him, kind of a low key problem, but 4 drops for him, 1 in each of the past 2 games. And I did some figuring. This is scary. When I pull out the calculator, the entire Notre Dame wide receiver room this year has accounted for 50 catches, 652 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That's not even Charlie Jones. That's not even, in fact, beyond that, that would be tied for 63rd in the country. If that were an individual, those 5 guys who've actually made catches out of that receiver room would be tied for 63rd in touchdowns. That'd be 22nd in yardage and tied for 14th in reception. So yes, modest as a group. And, we're even counting with that, the jet sweep. Notre Dame does get good use out of the jet sweep. That's probably the best way to get the ball to Braden Lenzy. They did do a jet sweep once with Michael Mayer at Carolina, and that was that's what I wrote about that day. I'd like to see more of that, and I don't think defenses want to see more of that. But I'm not even backing that part out of it. So it's been a chore to get those guys some separation, and then even if they are open, Drew Pyne's had accuracy issues, especially at home. He's been better on the road.
Interesting. And you mentioned Charlie Jones. He put on an absolute clinic against Syracuse in the middle of September in the game the Orange won, their closest, game of the season outside of Clemson last week. But, we've been focusing a lot on, some small things. Let's take it back a little bit big picture. And what would you say is the biggest mismatch that Notre Dame is going to try and take advantage of against Syracuse on Saturday, whether that be, a specific scheme, maybe offensively they're going to run, or, trying to slow down Garrett Schrader and Sean Tucker on Syracuse's offense?
Well, I just put together what we call our tail of the tape, and I'm going to try to remember when I'll be posting at ndinsider.com here in a little while, but I need to remember the specifics of it. But I'll say this, that there's really, in terms of freakish athleticism, Isaiah Foskey, when he is revved up, is virtually unblockable. He had 3 sacks against UNLV, granted. He had, but this is a guy who's got in his sights Justin Tuck's all-time Notre Dame sack record, career sack record. And he's 3 away from that. And I wouldn't put it past him to make a run at that this weekend because he is he might have been playing through some mild shoulder issues earlier in the year. I know he had something against Cal that he had to play through, but 2 block punts the other day on back-to-back punts, which is just ridiculous. And then Foskey, a motivated, urgent Foskey, he got the urgency memo, is somebody that I don't care who you have at tackle, how many people you have chipping, he could make things uncomfortable for Schrader. Now, Schrader is hard to get down, and it's interesting that he does not lose the ball. He's very hard to, what was one fumble all year for him? Is that correct? So, he's a monster himself. And but I don't know. Do you guys think Foskey's going to be a problem with that speed off the edge for your tackles?
Well, if you look at what happened in the second half last week against Clemson, Syracuse's offensive line just cratered, out in the second half with how much they had to play. And, when you get the talent that Clemson has up front, Notre Dame with a similar skill set, as time, maybe in the first half, Syracuse has a little bit more success, but if the game is close and it wears on, I see what you're talking about where, maybe they can get some pressure on Schrader.
Yeah, Riley Mills is another guy to keep an eye on. He's been productive up, because he played tackle or end, power rusher. They have very deep defensive line. They rotate three. A lot of programs will rotate three, but they don't really lose a whole lot as they do those line shifts. And they're a little bit better on the pass rush overall in recent weeks. Although Stanford with a quick drop was able to neutralize it, and so it'd be interesting to see if you guys keep Schrader as a moving target and use a quick 3-step drop stuff, because that's what Stanford did, and McKee, who's just okay, pretty much had his way. Although still at the end of the day, it was a 16-14 game.
Foskey listed as that viper position on the Notre Dame defense, really just a do-it-all kind of guy that is a freak in every sense of the word. Moving outside of Foskey, though, I know you also mentioned Riley Mills up front. How about the back seven of this Notre Dame defense? What's been the takeaway for those linebackers, for the secondary, as far as opposing aerial attacks are concerned?
Well, it's interesting. They had Tariq Bracy as their slot corner, and had to play. He had a hamstring issue that kept him out against Stanford, and they really missed him. He's back. They're starting a freshman in Ben Morrison, whose dad played in the NFL, Daryl Morrison, but he's a starting corner along with Cam Hart, who's rangy and experienced. But Brandon Joseph's a guy in the back, the Northwestern transfer, who had tremendous success affecting passes downfield and being just a ball hawk, a ball magnet. They used to joke about him having a horseshoe in his uniform, and it has not materialized here yet for whatever reason. Brandon Joseph was limited on the defensive side last week due to an injury of some sort. He did have a foot problem back in August, so that's something to keep an eye on. And then just not much ball disruption downfield from the secondary. Ball skills have been, this is a team with just 3 takeaways all year. One of them, they could have had one more, but it was wiped out by penalty. The linebacker crew, keep an eye on JD Bertrand is the one who's had multiple targeting calls against him. Almost had one turned over last week. Otherwise, he might have had to sit out a third time in the first half. But he'll be out there. He's their leading tackler. Jack Kaiser's been a little hobbled. He's their second leading tackler, and the rover. But he's been playing inside more often. But he's had a deep thigh bruise, only 5 snaps last time. They expect him to be back. And then Prince Kali is a guy that can be a game changer and is starting to get more time. He's just a sophomore, but he and Marist Leofau share the weak side spot. But so it's not a very deep group at linebacker, but it has been productive.
Just a couple more things before we wrap up here with Mike Berardino from the South Bend Tribune and NDinsider.com. So looking down the rest of Notre Dame's schedule, would you consider Saturday against Syracuse a must win for this team to get, to 6 wins? Because you got, next week you're home against Clemson, then taking on Navy in Baltimore, hosting BC, and then end the season at a USC team that has been very good in year 1 under Lincoln Riley. So, to get to 6 or 7 wins, is this a must win in the Dome this weekend, would you say?
It feels that way. Each week has started to feel like must win because, USC looks like it's back with new cast characters. And although, late in the Brian Kelly era, Notre Dame had established supremacy there. But I would say USC is going to be favored. Clemson's going to be favored when it comes in here, although Notre Dame did upset them back in the COVID year. But that was with DJ playing quarterback and lighting him up. I don't expect DJ to be able to do that. He kind of had his career game right out of the chute. But no, you make a good point. And really, it's because Notre Dame's in a weird spot. They have this great recruiting class lined up for this year and even the following year. You also have a group of guys who like the aforementioned Mayer and Foskey, who kind of want to do something right now. But if the losses start to build up, it might not be the bowl game alone that they end up skipping out on. There might be incentive to shut it down sooner. And then Marcus Freeman himself will admit that he's a work in progress, and that, as we mentioned at the start, the messaging keeps evolving, and that's not necessarily good. And even some of the, just the reaction, just the idea of, was he too friendly with the players? Is he, are he and his coaches going to be tough enough on him? Was Tommy Rees too mean to Drew Pyne? All this. I mean, so it's kind of been a strange year to cover, and that's why every game feels like Notre Dame really can't afford any more slip-ups, because Marshall and Stanford, that should not have happened. That was either of those. Stanford's not Stanford anymore, and it still it went sideways. So Notre Dame has not been in that dome for almost 2 decades. I'm sure it's going to be loud, but I'm picking Notre Dame in a narrow one, because you guys have obviously in the Dino era even have really struggled with Notre Dame. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. And you raise a good point. I still think Notre Dame can get to 7 wins. Probably, I'm kind of thinking that they win this week, but we've been surprised before.
Indeed we have. All right, well, there you have it. That's Mike Berardino of the South Bend Tribune and NDinsider.com, breaking down all things Orange and Irish ahead of this week's matchup. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, guys. Take care.